this is skipping ahead a little bit, but I was wondering whether they would do the James Bond Will Return famous graphic at the end of the credits.
Yeah.
And it felt like they were really holding out. They really kept you waiting. You had to wait till they got past all of the other stuff, even like this is a work of fiction, blah, blah, blah. And then they put it up there. I was like, interesting. Okay. So,
what were the exact words? Because I didn't stay till
it just said James Bond Will Return. So,
okay.
And we will get into this when we get into the spoiler portion of this episode. We'll get into why that's interesting, because it connects in with what they do next with the franchise and
Agreed.
Who may fill the role next. But before we go too far, should we start the episode?
Let's do it.
Welcome to episode 99 of the Extra Buttery Podcast, a free-flowing conversation between two guys who love movies and TV. And as we alluded to in the cold open, this episode is all about the latest Bond film to come out, No Time to Die, starring Daniel Craig. Long delayed, long anticipated installment of the Bond franchise, Daniel Craig's last outing as the character after 5 films, and something of a bit of a symbol of the whole COVID movie delay fiasco that we've been living with for the past 18 months. It was probably one of the most high profile things to get canceled or get its release postponed back when COVID was first becoming a thing. And then the subsequent moves that it made deeper and deeper into the release calendar became a little bit of a thing people tracked, because they're like, oh, yep, this big movie, it's going again. We're not going to see it for a little while longer. So how hyped were you going into this? Because I know you tend to be pretty hyped for Bond.
Well, I think both of us are pretty hyped for this, eh? I was legitimately disappointed when they said they were going to cancel the release and not release it via streaming at all.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that they held out, because I think it was a much better experience in theaters. And I've seen a few movies since theaters opened back up, and this is the one movie that I think I legitimately enjoyed watching in theaters. The others, I mean, neither here nor there. I could probably watch it on TV and wouldn't have made a huge difference, but this one needed to be seen on the big screen for sure.
Who is he?
James, you don't know what this is.
James Bond. License to kill. In love with Madeleine Swan. I could be speaking to my own reflection.
Yeah, because it's something like being the symbol of these big movies that kept getting delayed. It's kind of, there's some sort of poetic justice to finally getting to see it on the big screen, I think.
Yeah. And I think I actually had, when you watch a movie and then the opening titles and the logos come on.
Yep.
That's when I really felt like, oh, okay. It has been a while since I've felt this nervous excited for a movie.
Right. And nervous excited because you wanted it to be good, or
yes.
Just okay. Yeah.
I desperately wanted it to be good. I think for most of 2021, there weren't that many movies that made me really walk out of theater with a big smile on my face.
And
I really liked it.
Okay.
I really did.
Okay, because that could have gone both ways just then. I
know. With me, it could have gone both ways for sure. I'll have to throw in my own little party pooper comment, though, in the sense that I still think Casino Royale is the best Daniel Craig Bond.
I could sort of, I was thinking about that when I was watching it. I'm like, where will Jason rank this in terms of the Daniel Craig Bonds? But we'll get into that a little bit later.
Wow, you think about me when you're watching movies? I'm so touched.
When it's Casino Royale, for sure, because I think we've discussed in the past how, you've always rated that one very high, and I'm not quite as high on it, but I do think about that a lot, because I know that one's near and dear to your heart.
But I have to say, though, before we continue, this was a very different Bond movie than what I had expected.
Yes.
And from the previous iterations, it is so different.
Yes.
On a dramatic level, on an emotional level. I think that's what stood out for me You could talk about all like the technical aspects of it, and we'll get into that.
Yep.
But this very much felt like a different Bond film, and I do appreciate that. At the beginning, like midway through the movie, I was kind of iffy about it because I didn't know where they were gonna go.
Right.
But by the time the final scene ended, I was like, okay, I totally get it, and I really enjoyed it, and I think they did the character a lot of justice.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into that. But before we get there, maybe just a quick plot summary. So,
can you make it quick? It's kind of lengthy, eh?
it is lengthy, yeah. I mean, this is a movie that clocks in at like 2 hours 43 minutes. So, like
It didn't feel like that, though.
No,
eh?
it doesn't feel like it, but it does have a lot of material in it, and there's you could argue like almost an entire sort of short Bond film in the first half.
Agreed.
Or something.
Agreed.
You could kind of take that apart if you wanted to, but so the plot this time is that when we pick up with 007, he has retired from MI6. He is living in Italy with Madeleine Swan, played by Léa Seydoux. And just when they think that they've kicked off this beautiful retirement together, it appears that Spectre's not quite done with 007, or the former 007, I suppose you could call him. And there's a visit to Vesper Lynd's grave at this Italian Acropolis, and a carefully disguised bomb which goes off, and this leads 007 to doubt his trust in Madeleine Swan. He knows that she's the daughter of Mr. White, the infamous Spectre agent who we met.
He popped up in the first one in Casino Royale at the end.
Yeah, at the end. He had a bigger role in Spectre. You know, there was the encounter up in like the Arctic Circle or wherever, that scene. So he, like, Bond knows that Madeleine Swan has a checkered past, but this causes them to part ways. And then there's this big 5-year gap. And that's when something more like along the lines of a classic Bond plot kicks off, having to do with assassin nanobots that are being developed by the British military. And you've got kooky scientists. You've got Spectre going toe to toe with another rival criminal organization run by Lyutsifer Safin, this mysterious villain played by Rami Malek. And Bond is mixed up in the middle of it. He doesn't really want to get involved, but of course, being Bond, he's got to be pulled in somehow. So he finds himself pursuing Safin, ending up working again with MI6 alongside the new 007, played by Lashana Lynch. And of course, he's thrust back together with Madeleine Swan again, and it all builds to a huge climax on a perfectly designed villain lair island. So we'll talk a little bit about that afterwards. But yeah, to your point though, all of this stuff to do with Madeleine Swan, like, this is really the only time they've allowed 007 to be, well, he was shown to be vulnerable in Casino Royale, and that was a big change for the time. But you really see it come to a head here, where there's multiple scenes where he's really like emotionally raw, vulnerable. He stumbles over his words in a few scenes, which is not something you expect from Bond. Normally he's got the perfect quip or the perfect rejoinder to anything.
He still kind of does.
He still has it. Yeah, he has a few here. So it's not like we're getting a completely deconstructed Bond, but you see him like really grappling with stuff in this. And that was the thing that really impressed on me, the whole idea of this being a very different, like you said, dramatic Bond experience.
Are we going to spoiler territory now?
No, let's leave it for a few more minutes. But yeah.
Okay. So just right off the bat, like, it had been, the last time I saw Spectre was when it was in theaters. Like, I never really had the urge to rewatch it. So the plot point about Madeleine Swan being the daughter of Mr. White, I had completely forgotten about that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So that's actually important to know going into this film, because I think the story makes a lot more sense that way, especially the prologue with young Madeleine Swan.
Yeah, if you don't exactly know who that young girl is, then it definitely would be more confusing. And I was surprised that I remembered it, but I had it in that opening scene. I was like, okay, I know what's happening.
The one thing about Hollywood is that they're very good at casting child actors as younger versions of the other actors, so that there's enough of a resemblance.
Right.
And that actually becomes like a really key plot point later on as well.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
But I totally agree with you. I think this is the first time we've ever heard Bond say, "I love you," and meant it in not like a jokey or sly kind of fashion.
Exactly.
I think the relationship between him and Madeline Swan is very much central in the movie, and you couldn't really say that about all the other previous Bonds except maybe Vesper Lynd.
Maybe, yeah.
But Vesper Lynd was more of a plot device sometimes rather than like a true emotional connection we see here.
Yeah.
But if you think back to like Sean Connery, Pierce Brosnan, and all those other ones, like women tend to be very, they tend to be just thrown into the discarded pile after the movie.
Yep.
But not this one, and I appreciate it. And I think Léa Seydoux is really fantastic. She doesn't consider herself a Bond girl, but she's up there with Vesper Lynd and some of the other ones as like the all-time great female actors in the Bond franchise.
Yeah, for sure. And she, like that scene where they meet up again at the cottage in Norway was like, I mean, that was basically that you could have taken that from a romantic drama.
Yeah, totally.
That was never part of any kind of franchise. It would just that scene worked well on its own, and you could, Craig and Seydoux were working really hard in that scene to kind of convey that stuff. And you wouldn't know that it had anything to do with villain lairs or fun gadgets or fast cars or any of that stuff.
The other thing too that I wanted to mention was that we got to see a different side of M that we didn't see before. Like we got to see a really fallible M.
Yeah.
Who was like really quick to recognize their own mistakes. Because in the past, when MI6 used to betray Bond or misstep, they never really took full responsibility.
Yeah.
They're just like, here, James, go clean up our mess and just, we'll forget about it afterwards.
Yeah, M is usually portrayed in the earlier films as like just the taskmaster, basically. They're the person who,
that's right,
who gives Bond his mission.
Who's never wrong or almost never wrong.
And there's someone who's like, they're the voice of authority. They might, the M might pop up several times throughout the movie, but only for very brief scenes to kind of like do a bit of exposition or something like that. And then they're usually brought back at the end to kind of like roll their eyes when Bond does some final little thing, but here, right. Ray Fiennes, I don't know if he intends to continue as M in the subsequent movies, but
he should.
Even if he didn't, this would be a suitable farewell for him in the role too, because he puts a lot of himself into it. There's they explore a lot of like what it means to be at the head of a intelligence agency and have these kind of like judgment calls to make,
that's right,
about weapons and technology that are available to people.
I think it was really interesting that they made 007 the moral compass of this film, because he's usually not like he's the hero and he does great things, but M and MI6 usually point him in the right direction.
Yeah, saying
like, oh, you can't do this or you can't do that. But it's the opposite here, and I think that was a really interesting inverse relationship to explore, especially with the new 007.
Yeah.
Lashana Lynch.
Yeah.
Who was, I think, had bits of Moneypenny in her, but was also very much like a younger or another version of Bond, like the old version of Bond, where she was a little more cold.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And they clearly, in building up this character, you can almost I know Phoebe Waller-Bridge did a lot of script punch up on this movie, and they kind of brought her in specifically to put like a women's lens on the overall screenplay and kind of double.
That was a great idea.
Just to double check that like they weren't kind of writing themselves into common mistakes or making a Bond film from 30 or 40 years ago by accident,
Yeah, that's right.
So I feel like that worked out well for them, and they ended up with better female dialogue overall for the female characters.
Agreed.
And it also kind of it was interesting how they dwelled on the idea of like, or the hero specifically not knowing where the villains are, and how all of the lines between who's good and who's bad have kind of become opaque. And you can't, I think M says at one point, like, we can't even get in the same room with these people anymore. We can't, everything is so diffuse, and there's no like loyalty to nationalities anymore. Some people are just working for themselves. And so I felt like that was an interesting note to go out on, because I guess they want to connect it back out to what's going on with like geopolitics in the real world, maybe.
Yeah, so I think Phoebe Waller-Bridge probably made Léa Seydoux's character a lot more interesting than what was probably written beforehand.
Yep.
The fact that Madeline Swan takes charge in a lot of the scenes, and is like a sharpshooter, like who can really hold her own.
Yeah.
That was really interesting. A nice change from the previous Bond characters, female ones at least, who were always kind of the damsel in distress. I think the characterization of Madeline Swan in this one is way better than the one in Spectre.
Yep. Yeah, she's definitely more of a damsel in that movie. And yeah.
For sure.
Or even what they do with the very brief material we get with Ana de Armas. You know, when they introduce her, she's the implication is that she's like a newbie agent in the field and doesn't have a lot of experience, but she quickly proves her worth.
Yeah.
And by the time she leaves the movie, it's like clear that Bond is incredibly impressed with her. So
if she was in a Roger Moore 007 movie, there'd be a sex scene before she does anything.
Yeah.
Like, but there are other female characters in Bond who like kind of pop up here and there and help him along the mission, but they never really stick around. I think Ana de Armas was underused in this film. I think I would have liked to see her more, especially following, what had happened to Felix Leiter.
Right. Although I did see a counter proposal to that. I think it was on Twitter. Somebody pointed out, they said, the fact that any of us feel that she was underused may actually be a sign that she was used the perfect amount, because it leaves you wanting more. It leaves you wanting her character to maybe return in subsequent movies, as opposed to...
But that's not going to happen. Right?
Well, you don't know. I mean, if M or Q or Moneypenny or any of those people continue on with whoever is in the role next, you could see Ana de Armas come back.
But she wouldn't be doing scenes with Daniel Craig. That's the problem.
No, but I mean... Judi Dench did scenes with both Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig, so
yeah, fair enough. But
that's where the continuity gets messy, and we'll have to talk about that when we get into spoilers too. But
yeah, it's hard to talk about that without getting into spoilers.
All that to say that, like, Ana de Armas is so good in the movie that you are left wanting more of her, and I think that's a good thing. And I wonder where the line would be in terms of like having too much of her in one movie versus getting like concentrated doses in individual movies.
Right. Fair enough. I just think with the way they ended it, it doesn't seem right to have characters who only interacted with the Daniel Craig Bond to be involved with the next Bond, whoever it may be. I just think it would cause, because you can't really like replicate the same kind of chemistry.
True. It's
two different people, right? I mean, they could share like a similar mission or a similar respect for one another's work, but the sort of sexy banter that they have, it's going to be different with another actor.
Yeah, maybe. So, again, staying within the non-spoiler territory, what did you think of the villain Rami Malek as Lyutsifer Safin?
So,
I will interject really quick, and I will say, I guess it makes sense that he's named after Satan because... he comes from a family of poisoners, so I suppose it's not a weird name. If you think like, oh, we're a family of poisoners, we have to come up with a name for our kid. We're going to name him after Satan because we're poisoners.
I guess. Well, just going to the part about the interesting dialogue about how M says, like today's enemies are faceless. We can't get them inside a room and talk face to face anymore. For me, the Daniel Craig run, one of the biggest weaknesses is its lack of an impressive villain. I think everyone from Mr. White to Blofeld to Safin, I think they were all, in my opinion, underused, underdeveloped, or just lacked any real intrigue. I think this was like a huge misstep for Craig's franchise. But when you have a villain that's interesting, I think that makes a hero more interesting as well. Not to say that Daniel Craig wasn't interesting in this one. I think he is the most interesting at any given point, more so than any other scene in any of the previous Bond films that he's been in.
Right.
And just the fact that there is like a faceless villain, I think, like you said, it's reflective of the society we live in because everything's digital. But at the same time, Bond has always had a disfigured villain that he could sit across to in a table face to face and have an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of lacking in these films. I understand where it's going, and Bond has to be sort of a reflection of its current time. Otherwise, it just feels dated.
Yeah.
But I do worry in the future, like, how are they going to make villains interesting if they already made a point of saying we can't see them?
Right. Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, the thing with Safin particularly is that everything else around him, so like the lair, the motives, organization, the fact that he has all of these like peons in matching outfits, the trapdoor thing in the lair, all that stuff, like
the trapdoor.
All of that stuff is like classic Bond, like cool throwbacks to other stuff we've seen, but also kind of freshening it up for a modern twist. So like all of the trappings, the visuals and everything around the villain was great. It was just him, the character himself, and not having a well-defined enough vendetta against Bond himself.
Agreed.
Like, he keeps saying that he's in love with Madeline, or he has some sort of connection with Madeline, and that's why he wants to take her away from Bond. But that felt very thinly sketched compared to, like, I get he's got the world domination plan, and he wants to sell this horrible nanobot stuff to the highest bidder. All of that's fine, but it's just the core kind of relationship with Bond was pretty weak.
Was he going to sell his nanobots? I didn't catch that.
I feel like it was,
I thought he just wanted to kill millions of people to establish a new world order. Like, there was no. No,
I think there was some talk of, like, you remember they were tracking these two mysterious ships on the radar that were going to come for a meeting, and that's why Safin he leaves with his goons for a while during the climax. He was going to go down to the docks and meet them and, like, sell the product. He was like, our first guests have arrived.
Oh, I thought he was just going to transport them out.
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
Like, infect the guests and then transport them out and then be like, hey, go infect everyone else.
Maybe.
I didn't get the sense that money was, like, a huge motivator. But I was going to say, for Safin and his, like, whole layer and his, like, dress, did it remind you a little bit of Blade Runner 2049?
Yeah, there was some Jared Leto vibes there, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit, right? Just the way he talked, the way he looked, the walls, like the expansive space behind him.
Yes, all of that.
It really felt like 2049 to me. And that's a good thing, because I think both films were really, like, artistically very pleasing to the eyes.
Yes. Yep. So all of that was fantastic. Even the henchmen were kind of fun. Like, you had a henchman who had a cyborg eye, which then features into a great little bit during the climax. And you have a European accented scientist guy who wants to build the perfect...
He felt a little annoying sometimes.
He was a little bit annoying, but he got a good, he got his comeuppance.
Okay, so Obruchev, the doctor,
yes,
he reminded me a lot of Alan Cumming in GoldenEye.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I see
with
that.
This like this weird scientist with this weird Eastern European accent.
Yeah.
Who just apparently likes, being a bad guy because he thinks it's fun.
Yeah, he's got, he's drunk with power. He knows how to control.
He's drunk with something.
Well, yeah, he's drunk. He knows he can manipulate this all powerful weapon, and he's lost all connection with humanity or whatever.
Yeah. So the other part about Safin is, like, you kind of alluded to it, we don't know his backstory very well.
No.
Like, we talk about how his lair is, like in Russia / Japan. And you could see even in the trailer with, like, the kabuki mask he has on, there's a lot of Japanese influence, and with the costume as well. That was interesting. I was wondering, like, what sort of background this guy came from. Like, how did he become, other than, his past history and his past connection with Mr. White. I was wondering, like, what his exact story was. Like, is he, like, a child of, like, two cultures or two warring nations? And
they said that his family was Egyptian. So and they were all
Egyptian.
They were all poisoners. Oh, wow. So they ran that.
That I remember.
They ran that island to generate the poisons that they created for their terrorist clients or whoever it was, and which tracks, because I think Rami Malek's own family is Egyptian. So. But then, yeah, there's clearly at some point there was some movement to the Asian side of the map, and he started to pull in influences from that.
Yeah. He's even sitting on a tatami at the end, the final scene, the final confrontation.
Oh, right.
With the trapdoor, yeah. And I just thought that was really interesting, that it was something that the Bond films never go into. Anytime you mention, like, Asian or Asia or East Asian to Bond, they come up with that really racist one with Sean Connery. Which one is that one?
You Only Live Twice.
You Only Live Twice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
where James Bond becomes, like, Japanese through some sort of bizarre. Like,
with, like, single eyelid surgery. Anyway, it's just it's hilarious and funny and racist at the same time, but it's a whole different time period. But anyway, my point being is that I didn't think Safin was was one of the better parts about this film. And I think, but that just continues along the line of the Daniel Craig Bonds, where I don't think any of the villains were particularly interesting, even Blofeld.
No, that's fair. And also with this movie, I mean, you do have Blofeld himself stealing a bit of focus in the earlier part of the movie. So, you know, while they do explain that that's because of a rivalry between Blofeld and Safin, the fact that you have those two guys sharing the story at all means that, you know, the movie ends up devoting a certain chunk of the script to Blofeld and his influence, which, you know, probably takes some time away from developing Safin. So
yeah. So
in fact, I don't even think you don't even see Rami Malek like on screen as Safin without the kabuki mask until like it felt like an hour into it or something.
Well, he's not used very much. We don't get a conversation between Blofeld and Safin either. So I think that was a bit of a missed opportunity. And again, it's just like maybe because of the delay, but I don't remember much from Spectre. Other than certain key plot points, I don't think Blofeld was very memorable. I actually think the Blofeld whose face we never see in the Connery movies is more memorable.
Yeah.
Which is kind of ironic if you think about it.
Well, they stuck with that idea for a while, but then they kind of, they got a little, they got like an itchy trigger finger and they eventually had to reveal his face. And yeah, because didn't Donald Pleasance play him for at least one movie, but then they ended up
But did we ever see his face? I don't think so.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, you see Donald Pleasance as him because that's where Mike Myers got the whole like design for Dr. Evil, with the scar on the face and everything. And then
right, no, you're right. Yeah,
and then eventually there was like a more traditionally handsome actor who was hired to play Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever. And then they kind of talk it off by like, oh, you look different, Blofeld. Oh, I got fancy plastic surgery. And then they recast him again during the Roger Moore days when like, I can't remember which movie it is, but they infamously start the movie by like Bond picking up Blofeld's wheelchair with the front end of his helicopter and just dumping him into a factory chimney.
yeah. I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember. Should we get into spoilers, or do you want to talk more about Daniel Craig in like the pantheon of Bond actors first?
We could probably work them together. So we'll do our general spoiler warning right now. So proceed no further if you haven't seen the movie and you want to keep yourself totally clean going in. So with that said, Daniel Craig in the overall pantheon, I mean, for me, he still ranks incredibly high. I mean, in many ways, he's sort of, without sounding too basic, he is sort of my favorite right now because...
Well, yes. So I just had this conversation with my mom the other day. He's either one or two. Like, he's up there now. The only reason Sean Connery would ever be number one is because he put a face to 007.
Right.
He had the blankest, cleanest slate to work with. Daniel Craig elevated it to another level, to a much more interesting character. But again, I have to bring up Timothy Dalton, the first original gritty Bond, who I think was really underappreciated. I think he was wrong for this decade. Or that decade he was in, sorry.
Right.
And I think the difference between Roger Moore and Timothy Dalton was so huge that people couldn't wrap their minds around it.
Yeah.
But now looking back, I think Roger Moore was probably the weakest Bond. The Bond I liked the least, I think.
Yeah, that's fair.
He was too much of a cartoon character, too much of a dumb womanizer, too much. You never got the sense that he was like a deadly assassin.
No.
He was almost more like a playboy. Timothy Dalton, on the other hand, had zero playboyness about him. Like, you look at him with his brown hair and dark eyes, and you're like, okay, that's an assassin, and I don't want to have anything to do with him.
Right.
And I think that makes him difficult to cheer. But Daniel Craig, I think, not only did he bring a lot of emotional depth this time, he's a gritty Bond, and he's a good actor.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously he's proven it with the other non-Bond roles he's done in between these ones, and even before he was cast in the role. But yeah, you think about the transition between Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig.
Yeah, that's a huge jump too.
Even though Pierce Brosnan ended his run with a completely cartoony, like totally jokey Bond that was closer to Roger Moore than anything else he'd ever done, Pierce Brosnan had started his run with a comparatively gritty GoldenEye.
Yeah.
And even Tomorrow Never Dies was fairly gritty too, in certain portions. So I feel like Pierce Brosnan kind of gave this kind of slow kind of transition into total jokiness. And then when Daniel Craig came in, it was definitely a major course correction, but maybe not as stark as the transition from Moore to Dalton.
Yeah, because I think more years had passed between Brosnan and Craig.
Not to mention, like you were saying, the Bond changes to fit the times, and the 2006 Casino Royale was coming off of the Bourne franchise and a much more complicated geopolitical situation, you know?
Yeah, that's when superhero movies started to get serious too, right? So that's when people started taking all these things that were considered campy or funny or entertaining and made them gritty and realistic.
Yeah.
And I think part of it, you have to thank Chris Nolan for that. Making gritty like a buzzword in the industry.
Yeah, which is interesting that he then, like, you know, people have floated his name as a potential Bond director many times over the years, but he
did his Bond with Tenet.
Exactly. He did it with Tenet, and I feel like he was probably happier doing it that way than he would be being forced to follow whatever the Broccolis want him to do with the Bond stuff.
Yeah. And not to mention any Bond film with Chris Nolan at the helm would probably have shitty female characters too. Maybe. They really needed Phoebe Waller-Bridge on this.
So to go even deeper into spoiler territory and staying on the topic of the succession plan for this character.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting.
So this movie concludes with what appears to be a definitive on-screen death for James Bond.
The first ever, and which is a very interesting choice to make because they can go two ways when they get to the climax. You know, they've got these missiles coming in from the British Navy ship to destroy Safin's poison factory. And Bond he could theoretically, he's been told that he's been given a dose of these nanobots, which means that if he ever comes into contact with Madeline Swan or his daughter with Madeline Swan, he will kill them because the nanobots have been coded to target Madeline and her daughter. I don't think that was explained very well. But
it was they kind of danced around it a little bit. So Bond has this decision. He could either escape the facility and have to live with the idea that he can never see his family again, or he could succumb to his injuries and just let the missiles take him out. And he takes what is probably the more noble route, I suppose, the more poetically noble.
He had no choice, but he accepted it. Because when Safin closes the silos, after he had opened them, he goes back to open them again. Like he had basically run out of time. That was the decision he had to make then and there. Like whether to escape or open the silos. I get why they did it. And I guess they had no other choice. But I am a little surprised they killed him.
Yeah.
Did that surprise you?
A little bit. I mean, obviously because this movie was so dramatic and so much more interested in Bond's psychology and his emotional state and the emotional state of the other characters. I mean, it did feel like a fitting conclusion to the story, so that it wasn't like a strange choice on that score, but just in terms of like the way the franchise has worked up until this point on like a meta level, it was weird because obviously they've always just sort of insinuated that at the end of an actor's run as Bond, he just sort of goes off into the sunset.
Right. And also, like, I think it kind of confirms a couple things in the canon, no? It confirms that James Bond is just a name, doesn't it?
Well, that would be my guess now. I mean, they've never really paid a whole lot of attention to continuity or canon. You know, they've just sort of just sort of cast a guy and then they've kind of left it up to the fans to decide how they want to interpret it. But this definitely makes a certain choice, more so than any other final film.
And it's a blatant choice because I remember when they did Casino Royale, they said this is kind of like a soft reboot, right? Because we see the first days of 007.
Yeah.
Before he had 00 status. And so this is a fitting conclusion to his arc, but you're right. Like this really slams the book shut.
Yeah.
And whoever they cast next, not only will they have to reintroduce him, they have to explain why he's called James Bond. And I don't know. It feels like whoever they cast next is almost set up to fail. Like
it's
how
tough.
How do you live up to that reputation? Not only as like a spy, a super spy, but also living up to the idea that you are not the original James Bond, so to speak.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
Like you're just taking over the mantle, but not like from actor to actor, but actually taking on like the identity of that character that Daniel Craig left behind.
Exactly, because the prevailing theory, like you said, was that it's a code name and it just passed from guy to guy, and same thing with the code names Q and M and the other members of Moneypenny even probably. And then it sets up another question that, like I was alluding to earlier, will Ralph Fiennes and Naomi Harris and Ben Whishaw continue in those roles with whoever the next person in the role is? Because
will Lashana Lynch return? She's more interesting,
yeah,
as a character, because she returns. I feel like she has to be Bond. I don't know if you can call her James, but
well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, there's been some people sort of talking on Twitter that like it makes sense to keep her as a 00, but maybe give her like 006, 008, one of those. As James Bond says in this movie, 007 is just a number. So
I was just going to say, like, they made a point of dissociating Daniel Craig with 007.
Yeah.
Like, they're just like, forget about Daniel Craig as 007. It's just a number. It could be anybody. And they said that explicitly like 2 or 3 times at least, I think. And I think that was done on purpose to set up whoever follows Daniel Craig.
Yeah. So it could be Lashana Lynch, although I sort of feel like, that's where you get into that tricky conversation over, is the official James Bond a woman? Does that make sense?
Agreed.
Given the history of the character, obviously Daniel Craig has pointed out that he thinks it's better to write new characters for women and, have them lead their own franchises and not be kind of burdened with whatever people think James Bond should be.
If you think about all the female characters that have been out there, like written, like heroes, some of them haven't gotten their justice.
Yeah.
I think Tomb Raider, Vikander, I think was quite good. I just don't think they ever made a movie that was worthy of, having Lara Croft in there.
Yeah.
And even sometimes in superhero films, the female superhero doesn't really get her justice either. Like, look at Black Widow. Like, that was so long overdue and delayed. And by the time it arrived, you're just like, what the hell is this? Right.
Yeah, exactly. With this, I don't really have a preference. I don't get too caught up in.
Yeah, it just depends. As long as it's not Cucumber Patch.
Yeah.
As long as it's not him.
Yeah. No, I think he wouldn't be right for the role anyway. I like him. I like his work more than you do, but yeah, in this, not a good fit. I think it needs to be somebody. It needs to be an actor who does not have a lot of major franchise recognition so far. You don't want to cast somebody who people already have, a certain number of characters in their mind assigned to that person, because then people have floated the idea of Tom Hardy or Henry Cavill, for example. And like, those are guys,
or Hiddleston,
or Tom Hiddleston. Like, all of these guys are known for other characters in other franchises. And ultimately you would end up like sort of seeing shades of those other characters that they'd played in
Agreed.
Bond. And I feel like there's probably loads of young guys coming up through the pipe in England who could, or Scotland or Ireland or wherever. It's
overexposure, right, for those actors. Let me ask you this though: how did you feel about Mathilde Bond, that character, just having that character?
Again, like it fits the tone of this movie. If she had popped up in another movie, like say Quantum of Solace or even Skyfall, it wouldn't have worked because they hadn't done. They didn't do all the groundwork to kind of like readjust our idea of Bond as potentially being a dad. Like, this was the only movie where they could do it.
Well, also, it would have been impossible anyway, because Madeline Swan didn't appear until Spectre. But I get what you're saying though. Like, James Bond, dad? What?
Because even like even in Spectre itself, he was still up to his usual womanizing ways, hanging out with Monica Bellucci, for example. So
true. That was for like a specific purpose, though, right?
Of course,
he did that as a mission. But of course, every time sleeping with a woman is always part of the mission for him.
Yes,
but I just meant for Mathilde. I get that adding a daughter added emotional weight. I kind of hated how they kind of denied the fact that Mathilde was James's daughter in the first place, because I think it was fairly obvious. I'm not exactly sure why Madeline Swan lied to Bond about that too. Maybe she just wasn't ready to reveal it, and
Yeah.
Because they had broken up for so long and she had moved on clearly to another life.
It was really funny, though, when they were in the house together and Madeline was like, I have to show you something else. And Bond was like, another child.
Yeah. He had a couple good lines in this one.
Yeah.
Especially the scenes with Ana de Armas where, like, in between shooting bad guys, he takes a shot of whiskey.
Yeah, exactly.
Or has a martini. That's very Roger Moore-like. But I think Daniel Craig put, like, his own little taste,
of course,
little flavor to it.
Yeah.
But I just meant, like, in the final scene, I feel like sometimes Mathilde became a hindrance to the plot and the characters. If she was an important plot point, I would understand, but you could make the story work without her.
True.
And have Bond or have Madeline be the only one that Bond could kill if he ever touched her again.
Right.
Rather than having the daughter to
because they put a lot of emphasis on the fact that Safin is holding her ransom, basically.
Right.
And then Safin escapes through his fun little trapdoor with Mathilde and then runs down the tunnel with her for a ways. But then,
abandons her.
Yeah, just abandons her. He's like, oh, you don't want to hang out with me? Fine, you go die or whatever. So he just doesn't care anymore, which again hurts Safin's character because it shows that his connection to Bond isn't nearly as strong as he carries on it like it is.
That was, I think, the criticism of Blofeld too. I didn't like the fact that they were like half brothers or something, right?
Yeah.
Adopted brothers.
Yeah.
I didn't like that plot point. That was trying to force things a little too much. And to your point, I think they did that with Safin too, where they tried to manufacture this tension between him and Bond, but really Safin's gripe is Spectre. In reality, I feel like Safin and Bond should be teaming up against Spectre. Safin
is his reasoning for kidnapping Madeline is fine, I guess, but not for kidnapping the child. I mean,
also when Safin saves Madeline in the prologue, they never explicitly explain why. Like, he becomes this cold-hearted poison guy at the end, but at the beginning of the movie, he's shown to have a heart. Like, he saves this girl who shoots him. Like, why? That part I never understood.
He says something about it in the first meeting with Madeline as an adult when we first see Rami Malek, like, without the mask on.
The psychology office.
The psychiatrist meeting. He says something about it there, I think, maybe, but it's very vague. So, yeah, that doesn't really hold a lot of water.
Like, I kind of hate exposition, but this is one of those films where I don't think the exposition was clear enough. It was too nuanced. They sometimes, at some point, they needed to just come out right and explain things.
You mean like why Cyclops guy was suddenly a new, like, Safin's dude? I love how that was in dialogue. I was like, wait, that guy was working for Blofeld a few scenes ago. Why is he here? And then Madeline just says it out loud. She's just like, oh, I guess, aren't you worried that your new master will blah, 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 blah.
Right.
So,
and this is why I really appreciate Q, because Q seems like the only person who could put complicated things into layman's terms.
Yeah, that's basically been the character's function forever. Like, here's this gadget. Here's
gadgets.
Here's this gadget. Here's how it's going to influence the plot later. Blah blah blah.
So I noticed that in some of the interviews that they talked about how Daniel Craig only really likes gadgets for Bonds that are useful and practical.
Right.
Like, some of the Roger Moore gadgets are just freaking hilarious.
Yeah.
Like, gimmicky. So there was a noted lack of gadgets in this one. Did you miss those? I kind of missed it. Like, I kind of missed having that gadget that made you go, whoa, that's really interesting.
I mean, the watch was fun, especially in how they use it in the very last scene, or the last time you see it, and the one-liner that's attached to it. So you got like a real like dose of Bond nostalgia there, where it was like gadget plus cool death plus one-liner.
Yeah.
Triple threat. You had that, but yeah, I see what you mean, because other than the watch and
there's no exploding pen.
I mean, the DB5 in the opening action scene was loaded with like smoke and the Gatling guns under the headlights, all that stuff. So it had that stuff, but that was like an old school car from the 60s. That,
we had already seen some of that.
Yeah.
But I mean, in previous films, we had always seen like the gadgetry getting pushed to the limits, like the invisible car, for example, for Brosnan.
Yeah.
Or like remapping a person's DNA so they can change race. I mean, we don't really see that here.
I guess you could say that like the nanobots are a pretty important gadget.
Yeah, and we don't really ever see them. We only kind of see them on computer screens.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess that's the point of the nanobots, right? You're not supposed to be seeing them. I thought the set design for the Poison Garden was really interesting.
Yep.
Although when in the last scene where Safin and Bond are fighting in that little pool, I originally thought that pool was full of poison, not just water.
Because the workers in it were like, they were in like pretty protective looking gear when you first see them in there.
Yeah.
But then it turns out, I think it's just the big one full of the workers in the pink outfits. That's the one that's you don't want to fall in.
Yeah. That kind of has Squid Game vibes to it.
Yeah, it's funny how they the timing worked out on that.
Yeah. But I do like how brutal the hand-to-hand combat was in the end, where he snaps Safin's arm, I think, or shoulder or something like that.
Yeah, he gets pretty brutal with it.
But it also has like this same trope where like the bad guys are terrible at aiming. There's a couple scenes in this story where it's close combat, and you're like, how do you miss Daniel Craig from that close?
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with like guys who are supposed to be like super trained mercenaries.
Same with the grenades too. You're just like, okay, grenade against bad guy, big explosion. Grenade against Bond, not so big explosion.
Yeah.
And not only that, he doesn't break any bones. All he has is some hearing problems and maybe a concussion.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm just like, oh god. I thought this was supposed to be more realistic.
Yeah, not so much. I mean, they even work in like a bit of a joke there, where he tosses the one grenade up and then 3 more come down.
Yeah. I do appreciate the plane though that becomes like a sub.
Yeah, that's got some gadgety vibes to it.
Yeah. But that was really cool. That kinds me of the Roger Moore car. I think it was a Spirit, where like it becomes a submarine once it's underwater.
Yes, yeah, that classic kind of like the wheels.
But
turn
this one's
in
more realistic. Yeah.
Yeah, this feels like something the British military might actually use.
Did you find it a little slow in the middle? Especially the part where Lashana Lynch gets sent on a different mission to find Logan Ash.
Yes.
And then Bond is kind of like dealing with Madeline Swan and like talking to M about going to Marshfield and interrogating Blofeld. I thought it was a little slow at that point. At that point, it did feel like a 2.5 hour movie.
Yeah.
But then once you get past it, it moves at a pretty good clip again.
Yeah, it's almost like it round about the time of the shootout in the Norwegian forest with the chase between the SUVs. That's when it really kind of kicks into high gear again. I feel like the Logan Ash character, the Billy Magnuson character, was a bit of a red herring. You know, they play him up as being more significant than he really turns out to be.
And also I'm not sure how they were supposed to characterize him, but he felt like there were some Joker vibes to him, man. He had some weird stuff going on.
Yeah.
Like the permanent smile.
I mean, Billy Magnuson he's always got a big grin on his face. That's kind of like, you know, when he does comedy roles, it works for him, like Game Night and
that's his thing, right? But just in this movie, it was just kind of weird. And on that note, actually, when they kill off Daniel Craig, it's like a clean slate for them too, right?
Yeah.
I didn't expect them to do the same with Felix Leiter as well. I thought Felix Leiter was going to live. That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
It's also the second time Felix Leiter has died in water. Have you noticed that?
No.
Because in the Timothy Dalton one, he gets fed to sharks. So,
I forgot. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, they maim him with sharks, right? They hang him from like this chain.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was really interesting to do that Felix Leiter.
Yeah, which then like it goes even further to explaining, you know, if Felix Leiter can die on camera and be reincarnated by a different actor, then I guess maybe the Bond going out at the end of this one isn't so strange.
Yeah, I think that was your first clue that no one was off limits. Yeah. Like I know Daniel Craig is the main character, but Felix Leiter in Bond lore is quite an important character too.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm trying to think of like any other areas that we might have missed.
Well, I was gonna ask you, what did you think of the title song?
Oh,
I didn't think it was that great.
No,
again, I mean, I'm not a big Billie Eilish fan. I don't really get the hype. I don't really particularly enjoy her music, but I didn't find the title song particularly strong.
It felt like sort of a spiritual sequel to the Skyfall song. But I feel like Adele was way better. She's a better performer than Billie Eilish in my personal taste. So
yeah, I agree. But I also think Skyfall is like one of the best Bond songs ever.
Yeah, exactly.
And Billie Eilish is firmly middle, very average, maybe a little below average.
Yeah, like
because it's a pretty high standard.
Yeah, and I can't remember if I'd played the song back like before the movie got delayed, because I think they did release it around that time when they and I didn't remember it at all. Like when it came up here, I was like, oh, I might as well be hearing this for the first time.
Yeah, same. I had heard it the first time, didn't think much of it, completely forgot about it too. The Daniel Craig Bonds, where do you have this one?
Actually, I mean, you're going to hate me for this, but
it's going to be third, isn't it? Behind Skyfall, or second behind Skyfall?
I'm going to go Skyfall, this, Casino Royale.
I knew it.
Spectre, Quantum.
Oh, Quantum behind Spectre, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, so I should explain why I like Casino Royale most. I just think like Daniel Craig has been good throughout the entire series. Spectre and Quantum being, not so good, I don't think is his fault at all.
No, I agree.
But with Casino Royale, I thought it was much more exciting. It was the most exciting of all the 5 Bonds, I think. Vesper Lynd was a very interesting foil and character. Mads Mikkelsen wasn't the ultimate villain, but I thought he was an interesting villain, especially how they had 2 separate altercations, one being the fist fights and the car chases.
True.
The other being the poker table. I think that was a really interesting way to showcase like a battle of wits, not so much strength and maybe technical expertise. So that's why I like Casino Royale. I just think it's better paced. It's more exciting. The other films had excitement. They just come in spurts and it's too stop and go sometimes. Casino Royale, I think, there were quiet moments, but there was a smooth ride and very logical ride as we go along. So Casino Royale is still my favorite. I would hesitate, but I think this one comes second. And then Skyfall, and then Quantum, and then Spectre.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, so our lists are similar but different.
So I remember watching Quantum again, like just recently, maybe a year ago. And it was a lot better than I remembered.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because the second time that I watched it, which again was separated by like a couple of years from having seen it originally, I just found especially the closing action scene in the fancy compound or wherever it was in Colombia very boring. Not a lot of like interest in terms of the way the location worked or any of that stuff. And of course, and I never liked Matthew L. Marek's villain. I just never found him interesting at all.
Yeah, he's a little...
And telling that in Inspector, when Blofeld is like listing off all of the villains that he controlled from the shadows, he never mentions Matthew L. Marek's character. So
right. I just think Quantum... I think the plot point about the oil reserve or the water reserve was really interesting.
Yeah.
Not that it hasn't been done before. I thought Olga Kurylenko was quite good. Her career kind of fizzled after that, and I'm not quite sure why. She was barely used in Black Widow. But anyway, Spectre, I just think there were too many missed points. It's way too long. Blofeld wasn't interesting. And Daniel Craig and Léa Seydoux alone weren't able to save that film.
Fair enough. Okay. No, I mean, I like Spectre a little bit more because partially because of the cars. They designed an entire Aston Martin specifically for the movie, which I thought was fun. Dave Bautista was great as the henchman. I mean, I would have preferred to have Dave Bautista as the main villain, honestly.
Really? Okay, interesting.
I know he doesn't talk in the movie, but like he just has his presence was a lot spookier than Christoph Waltz's Blofeld. So
agreed.
But anyway, that's the bottom end of the list. I still end up putting Skyfall on top. Just for the. Partially for the song, honestly.
Well, I think that's a big part of rating Bond, though. The song has to be good.
The gadget use. I mean, I know you don't like the fan service stuff as much. I remember you deliberately pointing that out when we first talked about Skyfall years and years ago.
The cinematography in that one is the best, though. Sam Mendes is unbelievable in that one.
Yeah, and Roger Deakins.
And that film, I think looks the best.
So maybe as a final note then, and sort of flowing from that, what did you make of Karijoji Fukunaga's direction in this?
Oh yeah, interesting. Okay, so
do you feel like he kind of like blends in with the other Bond filmmakers, or do you feel like there's
No, he stands out.
Okay,
partially because, as we talked about, the emotional gravitas as a film. But that scene in particular, or that sequence in the forest where they're having that shootout and everything's like covered in fog.
Yeah.
That had very strong True Detective vibes to me.
Yeah. True.
And I think that's where you kind of see the difference between him and maybe like Martin Campbell, who's more like go.
Yeah.
Let's make this as visceral and exciting as possible. Whereas Fukunaga, like the whole cinematography with the whiteout in the prologue with the ice and the snow.
Yep.
And then the fog, and then the sort of the brown concrete industrial sort of compound at the end. I think that was all very him. I think that makes him stand out from all the other Bond directors. And honestly, if you look at some of the Roger Moore films and some of the Sean Connery films, it's hard to tell which director did those.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like I know John Glenn made a lot of them, but he
did.
But he was very much, I think, like he had that kind of Martin Campbell journeyman style director approach to it, as where it's less.
Yeah, he's really good action scenes.
Yeah, it's all about the action and just sort of stringing you along, and not so much about the visuals.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, just one last final comparison: Safin or Blofeld? Who do you prefer as the villain?
Oh,
that's a tough one.
Yeah, I guess Blofeld, because he's more. They develop him more, and his connection to Bond, even though
over 2 films, and even in Spectre, I don't think that he developed that well. I mean, they explained a lot of the backstory, but his backstory was tied to James Bond's backstory.
True.
I almost feel like I prefer Safin, to be honest.
Safin's got a better lair. I mean, if a Bond villain is
okay, well, if we're basing it on that, yes, I do agree Safin has the better layer. Do you like Safin's layer or Javier Bardem's layer?
Oh, definitely Safin's.
Both island.
Definitely
compounds.
Safin's, because Safin's got the classic, like, I mean, I would say
it looks like he's hired a set designer.
Yeah.
Whereas Javier Bardem is just like this like deserted island.
Yeah, he's got a bunch of servers. I mean, honestly, I would put Safin's lair as one of the highest in the whole franchise, because up until now, you know, there were some high points like the volcano lair in You Only Live Twice. That was that kind of set up a lot of the jokes in Austin Powers, for example. Because
the moon bases, yeah.
Well, it had like, you know, it had the volcano, and then it was launching rockets that were then eating other rockets in space. So it had all that stuff. Another important layer was the big tanker ship. I think that was a Roger Moore one, where it was a tanker ship that ate other ships or ate submarines or something.
Yeah. There's a lot of submarines. Yeah,
there's a lot of big vehicles eating other vehicles in the Bond franchise.
There's always a bigger
but yeah, no, in that kind of like pantheon of great Bond villain layers, I would put Safin's very high. If it's not the highest, it's like number 2.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, clearly I've thought a lot about that. So yeah, that about does it for our discussion of No Time to Die. But we have a lot of movies coming out in the near future, which we're very excited about. We also have some coverage of the Vancouver International Film Festival, which just wrapped the weekend after we're here discussing Bond. So we're planning a bonus episode on that. So that will be coming out probably after this episode, but before our much look forward to 100th episode, which will very likely be about Dune. Denis Villeneuve's Dune.
Very likely. It is going to be about Dune. We can't change it now. Dun, dun, dun.
Okay, so
it's Dune.
This is our commitment to you. So that is the plan. The next time you hear from us, it'll be a bonus episode about VIF and the movies that Jason has seen. I saw a couple of them, but Jason definitely beat me out on that. But then we will be talking about Dune when that comes out. Hopefully we'll both get to see it in full IMAX quality as Denis Villeneuve intended. And that will be episode 100. And yeah, and then the rest of the year's got even more fun stuff coming down the pipe. So get excited for that. But until that next episode, my name is Robert Snow in Toronto.
And my name is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.